The first thing I felt was Allie's hands against my back. Hard. Deliberate. Then I was falling, my 79-year-old body tumbling down 3 flights of stairs like a rag doll. Each step punished me, with sharp pain that shot through my ribs and hips. When I finally stopped at the bottom, gasping and bleeding, I heard her footsteps above me. "Grandma Clara." "Oh no, what happened?" Allie's voice carried the perfect note of concern as she rushed down to where I lay crumpled. I stared up at her through the pain, tasting copper in my mouth. My granddaughter's face showed nothing but worry and love. But I remembered those hands. I remembered the push. "You pushed me," I whispered. Her expression never changed. "Grandma, you fell." I was upstairs when I heard the noise. "You must have missed a step." She knelt beside me, her voice gentle and caring. "Don't move. I'm calling an ambulance." But I knew what I felt. And I knew what I saw in her eyes for just a split second before the mask came down. Something cold. Something calculating. The neighbors came running when they heard the sirens. Everyone praised Allie for her quick thinking, her devotion to her poor grandmother. 3 cracked ribs and a bruised hip, the doctor said. Could have been worse for someone my age. Allie sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand while the nurses cooed about what a caring granddaughter she was. She brought me flowers, adjusted my pillows, and asked detailed questions about my medication schedule. "The doctor says you'll need help at home for a few weeks," she said when we were alone. "I can move in temporarily." The offer should have warmed my heart. Instead, something cold settled in my stomach. "That's very kind, dear, but I'll manage." Her grip on my hand tightened slightly. "Grandma, you're being stubborn. What if you fall again? What if no one's there to help you?" That night, after she left, I lay awake thinking about her questions. Not what if I fell again, but what if she pushed me again? The distinction felt important, though I couldn't explain why. When I mentioned the push to the night nurse, she smiled sympathetically. "Head injuries can cause confusion, honey. Sometimes patients think they remember things differently than they happened." But my head wasn't injured. My memory was perfectly clear. The push had been real. Recovery at home meant long hours to think. Allie visited daily, always helpful, always concerned. She cleaned my kitchen, organized my pills, and asked many questions about my daily routines. Where did I keep important papers? When did I usually shower? Did I take sleeping pills? Her curiosity felt wrong somehow, but I couldn't pinpoint why. I started paying closer attention. Allie always lingered near my purse, my mail, my computer. She memorized the location of my medicine cabinet, my jewelry box, my spare keys. When I dozed, I'd wake to find her quietly moving through my house like she was cataloging everything. "Just making sure everything's safe, Grandma," she'd say if I caught her. The 3rd week after my fall, I overheard a phone conversation she thought I couldn't hear. She was on my back porch, voice low but urgent. No, she didn't break anything important. Just some ribs. The old lady's tougher than I thought. A pause. "Yeah, I know we need the money, but I can't just try again right away. People are watching now." My blood turned to ice. Try again. She was planning to hurt me again. I pressed closer to the door, my heart pounding. "Trust me, once I have access to everything, we'll be set. The house alone is worth $500,000. That phone call changed everything. This wasn't about an accident or even a moment of anger. This was about money. My money. My granddaughter was planning to kill me for my inheritance. I started watching Allie with new eyes. Every gesture, every question, every helpful offer took on sinister meaning. She wasn't caring for me. She was studying me, learning my weaknesses, my routines, my vulnerabilities. The next morning I called my lawyer, James Morrison. We'd worked together for 15 years, and he knew me well enough to take my concerns seriously. "Clara, these are very serious accusations. Are you certain about what you heard?" "James, I know what I heard. She pushed me down those stairs, and she's planning something worse. We need evidence. Document everything, dates, conversations, anything suspicious. And consider installing security cameras." Security cameras. I could do that. If Allie was planning to hurt me again, I wanted proof that couldn't be dismissed as an old woman's confusion. That afternoon, while Allie was at work, I called a security company. The technician, a kind young man named Tommy, helped me choose a system that would cover my entire house. Lots of seniors are getting these after break-ins, he said as he installed hidden cameras in every room. Makes them feel safer. I felt safer already. And I felt something else, a cold determination I hadn't experienced in years. The cameras captured everything. Allie searching through my financial documents when she thought I was napping. Allie counting the pills in my medicine cabinet and making notes on her phone. Allie trying different keys on my home safe until she found one that worked. But the most shocking discovery came when I reviewed footage from the week before my fall. There was Allie loosening the handrail on my staircase, systematically weakening each support screw just enough to make the rail unstable. She had planned the whole thing. I saved every piece of video evidence, backing it up in multiple locations. But I didn't call the police yet. I needed to understand the full scope of her plan. My investigation revealed disturbing patterns. Allie had been visiting more frequently over the past 6 months, always asking about my health, my finances, my daily schedule. She'd volunteered to help with my banking and had somehow gotten access to my account information. A call to my bank confirmed my worst fears. Someone had been making small withdrawals from my savings account, amounts just small enough to avoid triggering fraud alerts. The withdrawals always happened on days when Allie had visited. She'd been stealing from me for months, building up to something bigger. The final piece fell into place when I hired a private investigator to look into Allie's background. The private investigator's report arrived a week later, and it painted a picture of my granddaughter I barely recognized. Allie had debts I knew nothing about, credit cards maxed out, student loans in default, and worst of all, gambling debts to some very dangerous people. She owed nearly $50,000. But more disturbing were the other elderly relatives she'd been visiting. My cousin Ruth, who died 6 months ago in what everyone assumed was a bathroom fall. Ruth had changed her will just days before her death, leaving everything to Allie. My great-aunt Helen, who died last year from what appeared to be a medication overdose. She'd also updated her will recently, and Allie had inherited her entire estate. The pattern was unmistakable. I wasn't Allie's first victim. I sat in my living room, surrounded by evidence of my granddaughter's crimes, feeling a mixture of heartbreak and rage. This girl I'd raised, loved, and trusted was a serial killer targeting her own family members for money. But she'd made a crucial mistake with me. I was still alive, and now I was angry. I called James Morrison again. I need you to help me change my will immediately. And I want to set some traps. Traps. If Allie is planning to inherit my money, I want to make sure she gets exactly what she deserves. The new will was simple, but devastating. If I died under suspicious circumstances, everything would go to charity. Nothing for Allie. But first, I had to survive long enough to see justice done. I became a different person after discovering the truth. The trusting grandmother disappeared, replaced by someone calculating and careful. I started playing games with Allie, testing her reactions, gathering more evidence. I've been thinking about updating my will, I mentioned during one of her visits. You've been so helpful lately. I want to make sure you're taken care of. Her eyes lit up with genuine excitement. Grandma, that's so sweet, but you don't need to worry about that.
Nonsense.
Family takes care of family, right? The irony tasted bitter in my mouth. That same week, I told her I'd been having chest pains and might need heart surgery. Her response was telling, not concerned for my health, but detailed questions about the timeline, the recovery process, and whether I'd be staying in the hospital or at home. She was already planning her next move. Meanwhile, I was planning mine. I hired a security expert to upgrade my home system and started carrying a small recording device. Every conversation with Allie was now documented. The recordings revealed the depth of her deception. She would call friends and complain about having to deal with her sick grandmother. She discussed my inevitable decline and speculated about how much longer I would live. But the most chilling recording came when I pretended to be asleep on the couch. Yeah, the old bat is getting suspicious. I heard her whisper into her phone. But she's too weak to do anything about it.
Too weak.
We'd see about that. I started playing a more dangerous game. I began mentioning specific amounts of money, letting Allie think my estate was worth even more than she'd calculated. I talked about life insurance policies, investment accounts, and property holdings. Her greed grew with every conversation. At the same time, I was quietly moving my assets. With James Morrison's help, I transferred most of my money to accounts Allie couldn't access. I updated all my beneficiaries and created detailed instructions for what should happen if I died unexpectedly. But my most important preparation was psychological. I studied Allie like she'd been studying me, learning her weaknesses, her fears, and her triggers. Her biggest weakness was her ego. She genuinely believed she was smarter than everyone around her, especially me. She saw my age as evidence of my helplessness, never considering that 79 years of living had taught me things about human nature she couldn't imagine. Her fear was exposure. Despite her crimes, she desperately wanted to maintain her image as the loving granddaughter. The thought of public shame terrified her more than any legal consequence. And her trigger was control. Allie needed to feel like she was manipulating every situation. When that control was threatened, she became reckless. I was about to use all three against her. The trap I set was elegant in its simplicity. I told Allie I decided to hire a live-in caregiver and was meeting with candidates next week. Her reaction was immediate and exactly what I expected. A caregiver? Grandma, that's not necessary. I can take care of you. Allie's voice had an edge of panic I'd never heard before. It's too much burden on you, dear. You have your own life to live. But what about strangers in the house? They might steal things or hurt you, or... She was spiraling, and I let her. The agency does thorough background checks. Much more thorough than family members get. I watched her face carefully. They investigate everything: criminal history, financial problems, even associations with dangerous people. Her face went pale. A live-in caregiver would ruin all her plans. Someone else would be monitoring my daily routines, my medications, my safety. Worst of all, they might discover evidence of her previous crimes. That night, I wasn't surprised to hear her making urgent phone calls from the guest room. We have to move faster, she whispered. She's hiring someone to watch her. If we don't do this soon, we'll never get another chance. The next morning, Allie was overly helpful, insisting on making my breakfast and organizing my pills. She asked detailed questions about my caregiver interviews and seemed relieved when I told her they wouldn't start until next week. That gives us time to spend together before things change, she said sweetly. What she meant was, that gives us time for me to kill you before witnesses arrive. But I was ready for her. Every room in my house was monitored, every conversation recorded, and every move documented. The question wasn't whether she would try again. The question was whether I could survive long enough to see her pay for what she'd done. Allie's attempt came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen making tea when she appeared behind me, holding one of my heavy ceramic mixing bowls. The security cameras caught everything: her careful approach, the moment she raised the bowl above my head, and her shocked expression when I turned around. Looking for something, dear? She froze, the bowl still raised. Grandma. I thought I heard something fall. How thoughtful. Just like you thought I might need help down the stairs last month. Her mask finally slipped completely. The sweet granddaughter disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. You don't understand. I need that money. Those people I owe, they'll kill me if I don't pay them back. So you decided to kill me instead? You're old anyway. You've lived your life. I have my whole future ahead of me. I smiled calmly and pointed to the camera mounted in the corner. Did you know that everything you just said was recorded and automatically uploaded to a secure server? The color drained from her face as reality hit. She lunged for the camera, but it was too late. Everything was already documented, time-stamped, and saved in multiple locations. You set me up, she breathed. I protected myself. There's a difference. Within minutes, Police were at my door. Detective Maria Santos listened patiently as I explained months of evidence I'd gathered. The videos, the recordings, the financial records, even the pattern of mysterious deaths among other elderly relatives. As they led Allie away in handcuffs, she looked back at me with pure hatred. You've destroyed my life.
No, Swat, irari.
You did that yourself. I just made sure there were consequences. The trial was a media sensation. Granddaughter accused of targeting elderly relatives became headline news across the state. The evidence I'd gathered was overwhelming: security footage, audio recordings, financial records, and testimony from other victims' families who'd become suspicious after learning about Allie's pattern. The prosecution built a compelling case. Allie had systematically targeted elderly relatives, gaining their trust while planning their murders. She'd successfully killed at least 2 family members and stolen thousands of dollars from others before attempting to murder me. Her defense team tried every strategy possible. They claimed I'd manipulated the evidence, that I'd set up an elaborate hoax to frame an innocent young woman. They suggested I was suffering from dementia and had imagined the entire conspiracy. But the evidence spoke for itself. The security cameras, the financial records, and the testimony of experts who'd analyzed her pattern of behavior painted a clear picture of a calculating predator. The most damning testimony came from her ex-boyfriend, who revealed that Allie had discussed her plans with him. She'd bragged about inheriting money from relatives who died in accidents and had specifically mentioned me as her next target. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Allie and told the truth about every manipulation, every lie, and every moment of fear I'd experienced. The courtroom was silent as I described finding my own granddaughter standing over me with a weapon. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts: attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected peace. With Allie in prison, I could finally relax in my own home without constantly looking over my shoulder. The security cameras remained, but now they provided comfort rather than evidence of danger. My health improved dramatically once the stress was gone. The chest pains disappeared, my sleep returned to normal, and I regained energy I'd thought was lost to age. Much of what I'd attributed to getting older had actually been the physical toll of living in fear. The story attracted attention from elderly advocacy groups across the country. I began speaking at conferences about recognizing the signs of family financial abuse and protecting yourself from predatory relatives. My experience, horrible as it was, became a teaching tool for other vulnerable seniors. I also established a foundation in memory of Ruth and Helen, the relatives Allie had murdered. The foundation provided legal assistance to elderly people who suspected they were being victimized by family members but didn't know how to seek help. Many people asked if I felt guilty about sending my own granddaughter to prison. The answer was simple. I felt relieved. Allie had made choices that hurt innocent people, and she deserved to face the consequences of those choices. Family loyalty didn't mean enabling criminal behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you could do was ensure there were consequences for harmful actions. 2 years after the trial, I sold my house and moved to a smaller place closer to town. The stairs held too many painful memories, and I wanted a fresh start in a space that felt truly safe. Life in my new home was peaceful in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. I could sleep without listening for footsteps on the stairs. I could take medicine without wondering if someone had tampered with it. I could trust that offers of help came from genuine kindness rather than calculated manipulation. I stayed busy with the foundation work and made new friends through volunteer activities. Many of them were fellow survivors of family abuse who understood the unique pain of being betrayed by people you're supposed to trust unconditionally. We formed an informal support group, meeting weekly to share experiences and strategies for healing. The common thread in all our stories was the difficulty of accepting that people we loved could be capable of such calculated cruelty. But we also shared something else: the strength that came from surviving and choosing to rebuild our lives rather than being defined by our victimization. 3 years after Allie's conviction, I received my first letter from her in prison. It was full of rage, blame, and threats about what would happen when she was eventually released. I read it once, then filed it with all the other evidence from her case. The second letter, 6 months later, tried a different approach. It was full of apologies, claims of rehabilitation, and pleas for forgiveness. She'd found religion in prison and insisted she was a changed person who deserved another chance. I didn't respond to either letter. Ali had forfeited the right to my attention when she tried to murder me for money. Whether her remorse was genuine or simply another manipulation attempt didn't matter. Some relationships, once broken by betrayal and violence, couldn't be repaired. I wished her well in her journey toward becoming a better person, but my 80th birthday was a celebration rather than a source of anxiety. Surrounded by chosen family, friends who'd proven their loyalty through actions rather than blood relations, I felt more secure and loved than I had in years. The foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We'd helped hundreds of elderly people recognize and escape from abusive family situations. We'd lobbied for stronger laws protecting seniors from financial exploitation and had created educational programs used by banks and social service agencies. My story had become part of training materials for law enforcement officers learning to recognize elder abuse. The systematic way I'd documented Ali's crimes provided a template for other victims who needed to build legal cases against predatory relatives. The most rewarding part was the letters from people who'd been inspired to take action in their own situations. A woman in Arizona who'd installed cameras to catch her nephew stealing from her. A man in Florida who discovered his daughter-in-law was systematically draining his accounts. A couple in Oregon who'd recognized the warning signs and sought help before becoming victims. Each story reinforced the lesson I'd learned. Predators succeed when victims feel isolated and helpless. But victims who understood their situation and took strategic action could protect themselves and seek justice. The key was recognizing that family relationships should be based on mutual respect and genuine care, not obligation and exploitation. When family members treated you as a resource to be consumed rather than a person to be cherished, you had the right to protect yourself by any means necessary. As I settled into the quiet routine of my 80s, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that day on the stairs. The woman who'd tumbled down those steps had been trusting, generous, and naive about the capacity for cruelty within her own family. The woman I'd become was still generous, but wiser about protecting that generosity from exploitation. I'd learned to distinguish between people who loved me and people who loved what I could do for them. The experience with Ali had taught me that survival sometimes required becoming someone tougher, more strategic, and less accommodating than I'd ever imagined I could be. But it had also shown me that I possessed strengths I'd never needed to use before. At 79, I'd learned to install security systems, conduct investigations, gather evidence, and build legal cases. I discovered I could be calculating when necessary, strategic when threatened, and absolutely ruthless when protecting myself from people who wanted to harm me. These weren't skills I'd wanted to develop, but they'd saved my life and the lives of others. The foundation continued to grow, and I remained actively involved in its work despite my age. Every person we helped represented a victory over predators who thought elderly people were easy targets. We proved them wrong, one case at a time. Ali would be eligible for parole consideration in 22 more years, when I'd be over 100 years old. I might not live to see that day, but I'd created systems and safeguards that would continue protecting people long after I was gone. That felt like the most important legacy I could leave. Not money or property, but knowledge and tools that could help vulnerable people protect themselves from those who would exploit them. The 10th anniversary of my fall down the stairs passed quietly. I marked it not as a day of trauma, but as the beginning of my awakening to truths I'd been blind to for too long. That push had been the catalyst for everything that followed. The investigation, the trial, the foundation, and the new life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. I still lived independently in my smaller house, still volunteered with elderly advocacy groups, and still spoke at conferences about recognizing family abuse. My story had become part of criminology textbooks and social work training programs. But more importantly, I'd found peace. Real peace that came from knowing I was safe, surrounded by people who cared about me genuinely, and engaged in work that made a difference in other people's lives. The nightmares about falling had stopped years ago. The hypervigilance that had kept me alive during Ali's murder attempts had faded into simple caution. I could trust again, but selectively, based on evidence rather than assumptions. My health remained good, my mind stayed sharp, and my purpose felt clear. I'd survived something that destroyed other people and had used that survival to help others avoid similar fates. Late at night, when I reflected on everything that had happened, I felt grateful rather than bitter. Grateful that I'd been strong enough to recognize the danger, smart enough to document it, and determined enough to seek justice. Grateful that Ali's attempts to destroy me had ultimately made me stronger than I'd ever been before. And grateful that I'd lived long enough to see justice done and to help others protect themselves from predators who wore the masks of loving family member. My story became a case study in criminal psychology programs, illustrating how elderly people could be both vulnerable to family predators and capable of sophisticated self-protection when properly motivated. Researchers were particularly interested in the systematic way I documented evidence and built a legal case. The security camera footage of Ali's attempted assault was shown in law enforcement training sessions across the country. It demonstrated how predators often revealed their true nature when they thought they were unobserved, and how victims could use technology to protect themselves. My foundation partnered with technology companies to develop affordable security systems specifically designed for elderly people. We created simple, user-friendly packages that could be installed by seniors without technical expertise, but provided comprehensive protection against family predators. The irony wasn't lost on me that the granddaughter who'd tried to kill me had inadvertently sparked innovations that would protect thousands of other elderly people from similar attacks. We also developed educational programs for financial institutions, teaching bank employees how to recognize signs of elder financial abuse and providing them with protocols for intervening when they suspected customers were being victimized. Many of these programs were inspired by the way Ali had systematically stolen from my accounts, small amounts designed to avoid detection, but adding up to significant theft over time. Each program we launched felt like another victory over the mindset that had nearly destroyed me. We were transforming victim experiences into protective resources for others. On my 85th birthday, I received an unexpected gift. The prosecutor who'd handled Ali's case, now a judge, sent me a letter explaining that my case had been instrumental in passing new legislation strengthening penalties for elder abuse. The Clara Thompson Protection Act created enhanced sentences for family members who committed crimes against elderly relatives and established funding for victim support services. It was named in recognition of my systematic documentation of family predation and my advocacy work afterward. I cried when I read the letter, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense that my suffering had been transformed into something meaningful. Laws that would protect future victims bore my name. That felt like the ultimate vindication. The foundation threw a celebration that evening, attended by dozens of people whose lives had been changed by our programs. Survivors, advocates, law enforcement officers, and social workers gathered to mark not just my birthday, but the difference our work had made in communities across the country. As I looked around the room at faces representing thousands of lives touched by our mission, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from turning personal tragedy into public good. Ali had tried to reduce my life to dollar signs in her bank account. Instead, her crimes had inspired a movement that made life safer and more secure for vulnerable people everywhere. The woman she'd seen as a weak, easy target had become someone whose influence would outlast them both. That night, I updated my will one final time. Everything would go to sustain the foundation's work long after I was gone. The years that followed brought a deeper understanding of how trauma could be transformed into purpose. I'd spent the first 79 years of my life as someone things happen to. The push down the stairs had forced me to become someone who made things happen instead. That transformation hadn't been easy or pleasant. I'd had to develop skills I'd never wanted, confront truths about people I'd loved, and accept that survival sometimes required becoming harder than felt natural. But the alternative had been death or continued victimization. When those were the only choices, becoming stronger wasn't optional. My work with the foundation brought me into contact with other survivors who'd made similar journeys. We shared an understanding that you could love your family while still protecting yourself from family members who meant you harm. We'd all learned that setting boundaries with dangerous people wasn't cruel. It was necessary for survival. The letters from Allie had stopped coming several years earlier. I didn't know if this meant she'd given up on manipulation or if prison officials had stopped delivering them. Either way, the silence felt peaceful. I hoped she'd found genuine rehabilitation and would never hurt anyone again. But hope didn't require trust, and I maintained all the protective measures I'd put in place after her arrest. Some betrayals were too fundamental to risk repeating. Forgiveness didn't mean making yourself vulnerable to future harm. As I approached 90, I began preparing for my own mortality in ways that felt peaceful rather than morbid. The foundation was well established with competent leadership that would continue the work long after I was gone. My personal affairs were in order, with clear instructions for handling everything from funeral arrangements to the disposal of my belongings. Most importantly, I'd created systems to protect vulnerable people that would outlast my own lifetime. The security protocols, educational programs, and legal resources we developed would continue helping people recognize and escape from family predation. My story would continue being told in textbooks, training programs, and support groups. Each telling might inspire someone to document evidence, seek help, or refuse to accept victimization as inevitable. That felt like the most important legacy possible, not money or property, but knowledge that could save lives. The physical reminders of Allie's attacks had long since healed. My ribs no longer ached in cold weather, and I'd regained full mobility despite my age. But the emotional scars had transformed into wisdom about human nature and strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd learned that people were capable of both extraordinary kindness and shocking cruelty, sometimes within the same family. The challenge was learning to distinguish between the two and respond appropriately to each. Trust was a gift that should be earned through consistent actions, not assumed based on blood relationships or emotional manipulation. And survival sometimes required becoming someone you'd never planned to be. The final chapter of my story wasn't about revenge or justice or even survival. It was about transformation. The elderly woman who'd been pushed down the stairs had become someone who pushed back against systems that enabled elder abuse. My 90th birthday celebration was held at the Foundation's headquarters, surrounded by staff members, volunteers, and survivors whose lives had been changed by our programs. Awards covered the walls recognizing our impact on legislation, law enforcement training, and victim services. But the most meaningful recognition came from individuals who'd escaped dangerous family situations because they'd learned to recognize warning signs from our educational materials. A woman in Texas who'd avoided financial exploitation because she'd attended one of our workshops. A man in Michigan who documented evidence of abuse before it escalated to violence. A couple in Washington who'd sought legal help after recognizing patterns described in our training programs. Each success story represented the transformation of my personal trauma into protective resources for others. Allie would be eligible for parole consideration in just a few more years. I'd be well into my 90s if I lived to see that day. Whether I survived long enough to testify at her parole hearing didn't matter. The impact statement I'd prepared years earlier would speak for me if necessary. But more importantly, the systems we'd created would continue protecting people regardless of what happened to either of us individually. That felt like the ultimate victory over everything she'd tried to do to me. Looking back across the decades since that terrible day on the stairs, I could trace a clear line from victim to survivor to advocate. Each stage had required different strengths, different skills, and different ways of understanding the world. The victim had been naive and trusting, unable to imagine that someone she loved could want to kill her for money. The survivor had been strategic and determined, willing to do whatever was necessary to document crimes and seek justice. The advocate had been generous with hard-earned wisdom, channeling personal trauma into resources that helped others avoid similar fates. All three women lived within me, each contributing something essential to who I'd become. The Foundation's work continued expanding into new areas. We developed programs for recognizing elder abuse in assisted living facilities, protocols for investigating suspicious deaths among elderly people, and training materials for healthcare workers who might encounter victims. My personal story had become a small part of a larger movement recognizing that elderly people deserved protection from exploitation and had the right to defend themselves when that protection failed. The woman Allie had seen as a helpless victim had become part of something much larger and more powerful than either of us individually. That transformation felt like the most profound victory possible. Not just surviving her attacks, but using that survival to prevent similar attacks against others. As I write these final words, I'm 92 years old and still living independently in the home I chose after escaping from the house where Allie tried to kill me. The foundation I created continues protecting vulnerable people across the country, and my story continues being told wherever people gather to learn about elder abuse prevention. Allie was denied parole at her first hearing 2 years ago. The panel cited concerns about her continued inability to take full responsibility for her crimes and her focus on blaming others for her situation. She'll be eligible for another hearing in 5 years. Whether she's eventually released doesn't frighten me anymore. The scared woman who once trusted blindly has been replaced by someone who trusts wisely and protects herself strategically. If she ever comes looking for me again, she'll find security systems, legal protections, and a support network of people who understand exactly who and what she is. More importantly, she'll find someone who's no longer afraid of her. The push down those stairs was meant to be the beginning of my end. Instead, it became the beginning of my real life, a life defined by purpose rather than fear, by strength rather than vulnerability, by wisdom earned through survival. That's the story I want to leave behind. Not the tale of an elderly woman who was victimized, but the story of someone who refused to remain a victim and chose to transform trauma into protection for others. My daily routine now includes things that would have been unimaginable during those first 79 years. I check security system reports, review foundation case files, and correspond with law enforcement agencies implementing our training programs. The skills I developed out of necessity, investigation techniques, evidence documentation, legal strategy, became tools for helping others navigate similar dangers. I've testified before legislative committees, consulted with criminology researchers, and advised law enforcement agencies on elder abuse cases. The quiet grandmother who once trusted everyone has become an expert on family predation whose insights are sought by professionals across the country. But perhaps the most important change is internal. I wake up each morning with a sense of purpose that goes far beyond my own safety and security. Every day brings opportunities to help someone else recognize danger, document evidence, or escape from exploitation. That sense of mission has given meaning to experiences that once felt senseless. Allie's attempts to destroy me ultimately created something much more valuable than whatever inheritance she'd been planning to steal. The foundation will outlast both of us, continuing to protect people who might otherwise become victims of family predators who mistake kindness for weakness and age for helplessness. When my time finally comes, I'll leave behind something more precious than money or property. I'll leave behind knowledge, systems, and protections that will help vulnerable people defend themselves long after I'm gone. That feels like the most important legacy anyone could hope for. And so my story ends not with bitterness or fear, but with quiet satisfaction. The granddaughter, who pushed me down the stairs thinking she was eliminating a weak obstacle accidentally, created someone much stronger and more dangerous than she ever imagined. I survived her murder attempts and used that survival to become someone who helps others survive similar attacks. The victim became a protector, the target became a defender, and the intended ending became a beginning. Allie wanted my money and my silence. She got neither. Instead, she got exposure, consequences, and the knowledge that her intended victim had become her most effective opponent. The stairs in my old house were just stairs. The push was just a moment of violence. But what grew from that moment was a lifetime of purpose dedicated to ensuring that other elderly people wouldn't face similar dangers alone. I closed this account on a morning when sunshine streams through windows protected by security systems I learned to operate, in a home chosen for safety rather than sentiment, surrounded by evidence of a life rebuilt from the fragments of betrayal. The push down the stairs was meant to end my story. Instead, it taught me that some stories are just beginning when they seem to be over. And some victories come not from avoiding defeat, but from transforming it into something the aggressor never saw coming. The woman who fell down those stairs would never be the same again. That turned out to be exactly what the world needed.